من جديد نواصل هذه الجلسات الحوارية المفتوحة. عنوان الجلسة: العقد الجديد بين حكومات وشعوب المنطقة، أهمية الحفاظ على الثروات الطبيعية التي تواجه تحولا جذريا وتحديات أساسية. كيف يمكن للحكومات تعزيز قيمة الموارد الطبيعية؟ كيف تتكيف اقتصادات حكومات المنطقة على المدى الطويل مع التطور الجذري في أسواق الطاقة العالمية؟ وما هو الدور الذي يمكن أن تلعبه الخصخصة؟ وماذا سيرث الجيل الجديد مع هذه الخطط؟ أرحب بدكتور تشانغ الأمين العام للمنتدى العالمي لأمن الطاقة من الصين، دكتور لويس بلان من مركز التحليل والتخطيط والاستراتيجية في وزارة الخارجية الفرنسية من فرنسا، سعادة السفير توماس فليتشر بروفيسور في جامعة نيويورك في المملكة المتحدة وفي أبو ظبي، محمد علم شريك رئيسي في شركة علم أسوسييتس وعضو مجلس إدارة بيروت انستيتيوت، وأحمد الجليلي الشريك الإداري وشركة المحاماة الدولية وعضو المجلس الاستشاري في بيروت انستيتيوت في الإمارات العربية المتحدة. هذه الجلسة يديرها حسن فتاح الخبير في العلاقات الدولية ورئيس تحرير السابق لصحيفة The National في الإمارات العربية المتحدة.
Thanks for joining us. I'm quite impressed by how quickly we got out of lunch. So kudos to Raghida for getting us in here quickly. The idea of the social contract is actually, it dates back way to the days of the Greek philosophers, actually, pushed by Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau. It's a theory, really. But the question is, what does it actually mean? And as we sit and talk about the massive tectonic forces that are impacting this region, what actually is happening with how is the social contract changing? Let me start with Ahmed el-Gaili, sorry. What actually has the social contract in this region been until now?
First, thanks for having me here. I think it's important to understand that we can't speak of a single unitary Arab social contract. So we will be speaking in stylized facts here because we're talking about a region of 22 countries with very different social and political drivers in each one of them. But if we were to generalize, so to speak, the traditional Arab social contract consisted of the state as the primary provider. It's the primary provider of jobs. Most societies expect that students will graduate college and get a job in the public sector. It is the primary provider of health and education. Invariably, there was a promise and a reciprocal expectation that the state will provide free health and education. And the state was also the subsidizer of food and fuel. And that, generally speaking, across the region, that was the social contract in exchange for the certain social and political rights that were agreed between governments and their populations. In the Gulf and in the oil-rich countries, that was even more pronounced, and it's not a surprise that it was an Arab who co-authored the idea of, or the book on the rentier state, the el-Iqtisad al-Ray'i, the idea that economies are deriving vast majority of their sources from rents from natural resources typically. And importantly, the state is the collector of these rents and simultaneously the distributor of those rents. So that unique role for the state in those economies translated into a very specific relationship where the general populace looked to the state and only the state as the main driver of economic policy, of employment, and of the entire flow of cash through the system. We'll talk through the session how that is changing and why it wasn't sustainable, and specifically as the subject of the panel in the context of the energy economies and what changes in that landscape are challenging that model. But I'll leave it there so that we can get to that discussion.
So that's our starting ground. And our real question is, where are we going? How does this change and how does the change be positive in the first place, and how can everyone be involved in that change? And that's the real question. So, Mohamed, Alem, tell me about where is this going? How is this social contract changing in the region?
Obviously, there are several drivers for change, but essentially, I would look in the short history because, as Ahmed said, we can't talk of a specific pattern where we can equalize all Arab countries. You have republics, you have, from a constitutional point of view, you have constitutional monarchies, you have different kinds of regimes that constitute the foundations of how people and state talk together. However, in this period of time, we can quickly say that in the places where the divide between state and people and population, such as the countries that are part of what's called the Arab Spring, have made some changes, successfully sometimes, some other times less successfully. So very quickly, Tunis and Egypt had amazing two experiences. Both in Tunis and Egypt, you had a new constitution, 2014, where it was redefined in terms of broad sense what would be the items that have to be there and what should be out. I think it's been successful. In Libya, unfortunately, this has not yielded yet, but we can see that the movement, the requirements in some other places, which I'm sure we will come also to discuss, such as Saudi Arabia, and because of the will of the new political leadership, certain transparencies will come for the first time into this type of sector, which would also require a specific arrangement between people and government. So we will see how it develops. It's getting to be extremely interesting.
Ambassador Thomas Fletcher, why do you think that the events of the Arab Spring, why is it that the attempt to rewrite that social contract during the Arab Spring, what went wrong there, if that is the first example of this?
So the first thing I should say is I'm a recovering ambassador. I don't still qualify as an ambassador. I think it's several things. I think none of this is taking place in a vacuum. What we're seeing in the Middle East is increasingly related to the renegotiation of the social contract more widely in the world. And I think everyone in power, everyone trying to get into power, is seeing how rapidly that's shifting. On three fronts, really. This huge challenge to trust in institutions and hierarchies and traditional sources of authority. An increasing desire, particularly among young people, to challenge this lack of opportunity, this increasing inequality that people are seeing, particularly since the financial crash in 2008, 2009. And then this third one, which is more existential, if you like, alongside a political and economic trend, around technology. And we all know that the smartphone is going to change the world faster than the internet did. We will go from the equivalent of cave paintings to the atom bomb in 100 years. 43 centuries it took us to get to here. It will take us a century to get the same way up the curve. And that's going to put not just many businesses out of business, but also many states and many ideas. And I think the Arab Spring was part of those trends. There are obviously some very localized factors, and the Arab Spring has become almost a swear word in the region. It's become associated with the rise of extremism. Clearly, many of us overestimated how quickly the Arab Spring could change the region. I used to go around in 2011 in Beirut saying something which now sounds very stupid, which was that the most powerful weapon in the Middle East was not Assad's barrel bombs, but the smartphone. That hasn't stood the test of the last 6 or 7 years. But I do believe that in the long run, it will prove more powerful. I think in the Arab Spring, we tend to forget that people were asking for three things: security, justice, and opportunity. And we mustn't lose sight of the opportunity bit of that triangle. We found in the launch of the Arab Youth Survey last week, young people across the region basically saying, why can't we have the same opportunities that we can now see everyone else having? And I think if we can get back to that, let's not call it the Arab Spring, with all the negative associations that has, but let's try and re-establish a social contract based on opportunity.
Opportunity and change, and rapid change at that. So, Louis Blin, give me an example of a place where you've seen that change take place in a positive way. Where do we know that the social contract has actually been rewritten?
Let me first thank the organizers for inviting me, and as well as the host country. The social contract is changing, but this change has to deal with politics, economics, demography, and culture. So it's a whole process which takes time. Of course, now it's speeding up because of the change in the oil politics. I will limit my words to the Gulf. In the Gulf, you have two regions which are ahead of the rest. It's Bahrain and Dubai. And it began now to, these two places began to witness huge changes, and they are becoming even something which is visited not only by Arabs, but by the whole world. I won't go to all these changes, you know it better than me, but I would start upon culture. Now you have among the whole Middle East something which is called Khalijization, as Khalij means Gulf, as we have in Europe Americanization. So what is this Khalijization? It's something which is coming from these changes, meaning that the social change we are witnessing is something not only coming from upside down, but it's also bottom up. The culture is changing, and we had traditionally a culture, the tribal culture, with someone, the sheikh of the tribe, who exchanged submission against bread and security. Now we have people who are compelled to work and to leave the state, the welfare state, and they are working for security and bread. And of course, they will ask, as it happened, for instance, in these two places I mentioned, they will ask for participation. It's not necessarily a political one, as we have witnessed in the West, but at least a social one. And this means that if, in order to see this change happening in the other places, people would have to behave according to their own culture. It's not only letting the rutra and wearing a baseball cap. It's something which has to do with someone who feels at ease with himself, and who is an actor of the social change, and not only someone who waits for it.
So it's partly growing confidence, actually, in the identity as well.
Yes.
That's very compelling, actually. So, Dr. Jianglu, what can we learn from China's example of how it's rewritten the social contract?
Okay, thank you. Especially to the Beirut Institute to invite me, and thank you for your question. China is always a very good example for any social idea. And the social contract I know is comes from France. But you know where is this concept go to France? It's from China. Maybe 2,000 years ago, the Han Empire put forward the idea of not social contract, but the idea just like this: the people are the base of the emperor. So when Rousseau and other French philosopher learned this idea from the translated books from by Arabian people, by Islamic books. So they are very excited. It is the democracy, but in China it's not democracy. But the social contract in Eastern China, that is such an idea that the arable land or the farmland belong to the farmers, but the resources belong to the emperor. So this idea lasted for maybe 2,000 years in China, even until now. But I think to resources, this is a very useful idea. For countries, especially the Middle East countries and some other resources-rich countries, what's the benefit from resources? How to allocate it? How to share it? It's a very big issue in these countries. In China, the resources still belong to the government. We say belong to the state, but it's allocated by the government. So it will also cause many problems. The problem is that all workers, families or farmer families, they spend most of their time to work, but get less. And the government, and especially some companies, especially the SOE, state-owned companies, they work not hard, but get much. There's a region of the disparity and maybe the high Gini efficient. So I think we could have a better model to have an equal share of the benefits from resources.
Yes.
Yeah, I can give you some idea from Norway, the state oil of Norway. It's a very good example. The resources still owned by the government, by the state, but the benefits go to the fund for everybody. Yeah.
So Norway is an example, would you say?
Yeah.
Would you say does China see Norway as an example for itself, for example?
We wanted to learn from Norway model, but later the government and the SOE still found it's not good enough for themselves.
Let me posit that to the panel. Is Norway an example for us as a sort of one of the higher level? Is that an example? What is the example for us as we move forward? It is a time of change. There is definitely a change happening in the social contract.
Yeah, if I may, I think before we go around trying to select which models to follow, we need to understand what are the drivers of change that we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the status quo social contract, and why is it not sustainable, you'll see that it is subject to a serious demographic challenge. Populations are exploding, especially the younger populations, and that is increasing the demands on the state, and the state is simply unable to meet those demands. In parallel to that, on the revenue side of the story, until recently, oil prices were extremely low. So the ability to meet these demands has been challenged. And fortunately, in this part of the world, that was coupled with leadership that had the political will to implement fairly difficult changes. But I think the change here is very different than the changes we had in the last oil cycle, because it's not just a question of oil prices getting low and then they're just going to go back up. I think there is finally an appreciation that there is a structural shift in the economy, that insofar as the energy side of the story is concerned, one, the era of high oil prices, the $150 oil, is over, whether it's a function of shale oil or other technological advances. Two, that oil, by definition, is a finite resource. And whether we are going to reach last oil because it's running out, unlikely, but more likely is we're going to reach a singularity in another new technology. whether it's cold fusion, as we saw in the movies, or more likely, the third driver is renewables. Renewables have reached, in some parts of the world, including here, parity in price with fossil fuel in the provision of electricity. So all of that is changing not only the sources of income for the governments, but it's also changing the role of the private sector and the population. Oil, by definition, there's a monopoly for the state in the production and the distribution of that wealth. While if we're dealing with renewables and other forms of energy and other economic activities, there is room for the private sector not only to play a role, but to take the lead. And that is consistent with the changing demographics. So it is possible to make the shift in the context of a leadership that has the political will to endure short-term pain to achieve those long-term strategies.
Thomas Fletcher.
Reinforce that point actually, that there won't be one country here that can provide the perfect model for the region. The region will have to find its own models. But I was just in Norway, and so I feel particularly struck by the way in which they are making that long-term investment in education. And what's clear is that across the region at the moment, not just that millions of kids are out of school in the Arab world, but millions who are in school are learning the wrong things in the wrong way. And what the Norwegians have worked out is that you need to invest not just in knowledge, but in skills and character. Not just in the head, but in the hand and the heart. And those are the skills that this next generation of Arab youth will need: adaptability, curiosity, creativity, resilience, if they are to ensure the robots work for them and they don't work for the robots.
Indeed, I mean, robotics is probably one of the biggest challenges we'll face longer term, isn't it? Blin, what do you think? I mean, what is the most important thing that needs to start changing, do you think?
Yes, just picking up the robots, I believe that the robots have no culture, but those who make the robots have a culture. So the whole problem to be solved is how to make not an Arab robot, but a robot which is the right one for the new Arab world. I believe that there will not be any post-oil era in this part of the world before post-oil culture. And the main, you see, for instance, if we take the Arab Spring, it was done with dictators, but not only political dictators. Political dictators, of course, but also in the family, from the very nucleus family up to the head of the state. And of course, everybody knows that he failed politically, but I'm pretty sure that it won on the cultural side, on the transformation of society, because it was the fate of demographics. And now this cultural revolution, it spread all over the Arab world, even in Saudi Arabia as we are witnessing now, meaning that people are evolving, and it's contrary to much of the readings, it's not the political leadership which drives the people, but it's the opposite way. They have to adapt. And people now are adapting, people now are much more aware than before that there is something around them, they are connected, and they know that they have their say, and they say it in various ways, not necessarily on the political field, but people now, even in among authoritarian rules, they have to be accountable to their citizens.
But you're saying really that there is a political will now to make that change, would you say? Is the political will there to make the change?
I believe that even among politicians, they have their own families.
Yes.
And they have their children among their families who drive them. It's something they have, if they want to exist, if they don't want to disappear, they have to follow the same path. And it is something very quick here in the Arab world, and it makes us very optimistic, especially here. Unfortunately, the whole region is at a loss. Here, at least, the Gulf is about the last Arab domino standing on the table after all these tragedies in Syria, Iraq, and problems in Egypt. So at least we have, even if what we witness is not fully what we hoped for, we have to support it, because it's the last chance for not only the population here, not only all the Arabs, but also the relations between the Arabs and ourselves in the West. So I believe that this is a path, and now we have to tread on it.
So where to from here? What do we see happening moving forward? Thomas Fletcher, what do you think is, what is the game plan?
The game plan? It's hardly known, but the game plan is, of course, participation. First is, and it has to do with sharing power, beginning by the family, and between genders also. And next, we have to switch from a culture where work is done by others to a culture of my work makes myself.
Thomas Fletcher, what's the game plan?
I hesitate to try and set out a game plan for the whole region, but I would say one area where I feel more optimistic is actually around accountability through digital means. So I'll give you a kind of hypothesis here. If a British transport minister said, okay, from now on I'm going to be completely accountable, I will answer every problem you have online, very quickly they would be deluged with abuse, cynicism, and they'd be pretty much overwhelmed by the response. I actually think it's easier, particularly in countries with populations under 10 million, populations where there is increasing internet penetration, and where there is more of a culture of deference and respect in politics. It's actually easier to almost jump to a more sophisticated form of digital accountability than it would be in a country of 60 million where those traditions don't exist. So you could find a sort of digital majlis through which governments can be held to account in ways that in the West we're not yet able to hold our governments to account. And I think that's quite exciting.
Mohamed Alem, what do you think should be the game plan?
Honestly, I think it will, again, vary from one place to another. It is foreseeable that in certain countries of the Arab world, we will see unrest again. Because, again, just trying to reinterpret this 2011 movement, it's just the beginning of a lot of things to happen. Some other countries have found a way to stabilize themselves and make sure that what we refer to as the social contract is revised, is updated, and is to the satisfaction of their populations. This has led to extensive stability in some places and in some others, even though they are quite around us, and there are no secrets when we talk, for example, about extractive industries and oil and gas resources. For example, in Kuwait today is a huge question mark about the ability to continue in a non-transparent system such as the one adopted by the Kuwaiti government. In other places, sovereign funds have came in to, and government have came in to do a lot of work. I can tell you about our recent experience in Lebanon, where we had been debating this for the last 10 years. And effectively, through civil society pressure, we made sure to have the Lebanese government join the, something called the EITI, which is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, where we will have, we have already a full commitment by the Lebanese government to try to be extremely transparent and sensitive with the information about all of this. I think we will see a lot of disrupt, but also those who will be able to make it. And I would say, for example, what's happening in Saudi is extremely interesting because people know what to expect. They have already for the first time an idea of where the country is heading. And you have to start by talking to your people, letting them know as a ruler where you're taking them. This way, I think there are a lot of things that will be absorbed and a good future being able to be built moving ahead.
So Ahmed, how much of this is about economics? How much of a player is economics involved in the whole rewriting? How much does economics play in this change itself?
No, it's central to the change, but I think it would be naive to talk about economics without politics, and hence we talk about political economy. And I think that is the driver for change, and that's why for a very long time, what is economically sensible, but what wasn't politically sensible wasn't done. And that's why you ended up with these economies with these chronic problems. But now, because it became politically possible because of young, strong leaders that are willing to explain to their populations that, look, take Saudi, for example. Saudi has been subsidizing fuel for a very long time. Over 2 million barrels of oil are burnt internally at very subsidized costs. If you ran that to the future, some studies show that by 2030, you'll be burning 8 million barrels. That's 80% of your exports, and losing that opportunity cost to export. So once you run that analysis, reform is no longer a luxury, but an economic and a political necessity at the same time. And if you couple that with the right communication to your population, explaining why you're doing it, and explaining how you're redefining that calculus of the social contract. Before, I gave you cash dole-outs. Now, I'm going to retreat. The welfare state is going to step back, but will allow you as a private citizen to make the same amount, if not more, in income, but you got to do the work. We are going to provide the ecosystem for you. We're going to build the infrastructure, the laws and regulations, etc., and allow you to benefit from that. I think that is the bet that they're making.
Dr. Qiang, Dr. Liu, sorry. Tell us about, from your experience in the sort of changes that China has been undergoing, how central is economics to this change versus this sort of political angle?
Yeah, the science and technology change is very crucial, especially in the field of the public participation, especially for young peoples. The young guy in China, they are very smart. They can use the cell phone and the internet so smart, and still they have the willingness to participate in the public affairs. I think it's very important. And in China, they at first hand they like to make fortune for themselves, to buy the more and more expensive houses, cars, and second, they hope to participate in all social progress. You know, in China, we have many problems, such as the environmental pollution and the social conflicts sometimes, and maybe the unemployment is in every social affairs recently. You can see the WeChat. I don't know if you have WeChat. WeChat is just like a Facebook, but it will be more powerful. It can be used as a financial payment and so on. You can take a cell phone in China everywhere, you don't need to take cash and credit card. You just, if you have a cell phone, you can go anywhere in China. So it's very, very important, the WeChat and the cell phone in China. You can play everything or participate everything or just have a meeting by cell phone. So I'm not a propaganda for the WeChat, but if you like have a business in China, I suggest that.
We don't have much time left, but I'd love to take some questions from the audience, if there are any. And any questions? Well, let me ask you. Sorry, you have a comment?
No, does it work? Yeah. I believe that it takes time to build a state. It takes even more time to build a nation state. It takes time as well to build a society. It takes more time to build a civil society. And what is it about social change? It's about building a nation state with a real, genuine civil society. And this needs, and this is the hard task ahead of us, I believe, here, is to build intermediate bodies between the governments and the people. You have, of course, the many old bodies which were very useful, but now we have to switch to new intermediates. The Majlis one was, of course, okay with tiny populations. Now you have burgeoning population, and so without intermediaries, I believe that it cannot work. And how to find it out? It's a cultural problem, because everybody has to feel at ease with this kind of intermediation, social one.
We don't have much time left, but let me ask you this. What is the easiest thing to change today? What is the easiest thing to change in the social contract in this region, would you say? Starting with Ahmed.
None of it is really easy, but I think if you look at the kind of changes that are being implemented, they're all hard decisions, whether it's withdrawing subsidies, whether it's privatizations. These are all simultaneously difficult because of the political implications of them, but they're easy in the sense that they're in the hands of the government. These are variables that you control. But I think that what makes them easy or difficult is how you communicate why you're doing it and the rationale for doing them, and getting buy-in by the population in why you're doing it. The privatization of oil companies in this part of the world, on the face of it, is very controversial. But if people actually understand why it's done, if you anchor it in an understanding of we want to diversify our economy, we also don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. If we think that you might reach that singularity and you're left with this asset that is not worth anything, you might want to monetize it as soon as possible. So the logic is there, and it's easy if it's done in the right way and it's communicated and explained pretty well.
Ahmed, Alem?
I would say the axes are quite clear. There is a focus that should go now on, I would say, 4 items. The first is redefining ownership. Is extremely important, and it has to be entrenched in the rights of the people. The second is how you're going to manage this. And I will go very quickly on the examples of privatization or semi-privatization, because all of it is policy making. So going back to the IPO of Saudi Aramco, I personally believe it is a huge push forward towards transparency, knowledge, reserves, management, numbers, which was not the case maybe a few years ago. This type of instrument, though it looks very easy and just doable, it takes a lot of work. Everybody will have to get on their toes. You have now to be responsible for generating proper revenues. There is nothing under the table. It's like a totally different ballgame. At the same time, after we manage all of this, we need to know what is being done with the remaining of the funds out of those resources. I would say that the UAE is an excellent example of a very wise plan, very careful plan, investing in all sorts of even renewable energies around the world, income-producing items. The general idea is so well done that it shows also, you understand why the people in the UAE are very comfortable with this type of structure. All of this leads to a better understanding the governance that will be there and how people will know what their fate will be now and in the next years.
Thomas Fletcher, where's the low-hanging fruit?
Well, very briefly, when they asked Gandhi what he thought of British civilization, he said, I think it would be a very good idea. And I think if you asked many young people across the region what they think of the approach of governments to a social contract, they would say it would be a very good idea. I think the single easiest thing to change that would release huge energy into the public dialogue would be to signal from the top of governments across the region that there was that willingness to engage the public in this discussion, that willingness to reach out and encourage challenge and ideas and creativity. The rest is more difficult, but that's an easy signal to send. My kids, when I grew up, we were playing Tetris. It was all top down. You had to put the blocks into place. My kids are now playing Minecraft, which is all about building solutions together.
So it behooves us all to learn how to play Minecraft. One last one, Louis, please.
Yes, I believe that good governance means not to leave anybody marginalized. It's very complicated, it's a very thorny issue. We do not pretend in the West to have solved it, but that's the important thing, because if people or groups feel marginalized, there becomes political violence and ugly things.
And finally, Dr. Liu, take it away.
Yes.
What's the low-hanging fruit? We have less than a second.
I think the most important thing is the self-organization inside the society. If you are only a single man, your words will disappear. But you have an organization. The young guys organize together. Their words very high. And this, maybe more further, the government, to what extent the government can accept this self-organization. No conflicts, sit together and talk.
The change is happening, it's moving quickly, and it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. Thank you all so much for your time.